I take from design practice this notion of hope being a central theme of design. So when you're designing, you're imagining a future state you believe in, you are committed to it. Designing as an act of faith when you can make things better, maybe just a little bit better for tomorrow.
That was Sukhwant Jhaj, the Dean of University College and the AVP for Academic Innovation at ASU, where we've had the pleasure of working together on a number of space and strategy projects and in his former role at PSU, student success as well. And he, in my mind, is really the national leader on the role of design in student success, redesigning processes, applying design thinking to career development. We had a great conversation about all that and more that I think you're really going to enjoy. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Well, welcome, Sukhwant. I'm so excited to talk to you today about the role that design can play in student success. And I think a great place to start would be to hear from you about how you got started. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in design and student success.
Excellent, Elliot. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast. I am a designer by training. I'm a faculty member in the design school at Arizona State University. In addition to that, I serve as Vice Provost for Academic Innovation at Dean of University College. But more importantly, I'm a designer who thinks about what is next in higher education and how one might be able to use design practices to design an educational experience, to design a next generation of education system that will serve today's and tomorrow's students much better. Because there's significant room for improvement in how we have been delivering learning. I believe design can play a fundamental role in transformation of higher education. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I can't wait to unpack that. We can just pull on those threads right there. What do you think are the opportunities for improvement, or what do you see as the challenges?
Before we dive into the opportunities, let's just see where we are at this moment. If you look at the America's education system, let's see what kind of result it delivers. And what we see when we look at the data is significant equity gaps in terms of who the system is serving.
Not only who it's serving, but how well it's serving them.
That's right. Both of those things. For example, if you look at income quartiles, students who come from the top income quartile graduating at a significantly higher rate. Students coming from 66% by the latest measure from the Pell Institute. Students from the bottom income quartile, the number is 16% of them achieving bachelor's degrees by age 24. This discrepancy and the output of this system is unacceptable. And when we look at what happens once you get this degree, what is the impact on lives of people? Yes, we see salary premiums, but when it comes to wealth generation, significant gaps exist in who is gaining the advantages as a result of these experiences. So again, looking at institutional performance, looking at systemic performance, I would say there is significant space for changing the outcome for our students. And if we are to, in some ways, accomplish the promise of democracy, then we must serve all citizens equitably. And that's just simply not the case at this stage. So as we get into this thinking about what's next and how we might transform it, as designers, we have a unique role to play in this, in defining the problem better and thinking about novel ways in which we can engage the employees and the students themselves in problem posing and idea generation. I'm coming up with solutions that are better suited for today's students.
I love that. You know, the promise of democracy means serving all students and serving them well, having better outcomes, not just in terms of graduation, but in terms of life and career. And, you know, not just having the wage premium, but the wealth premium, the new measure you're referencing. where it's not just a measure of what you get out of it, but what you had to put in order to get that outcome. If we're talking about graduation rate and we're talking about wealth, and I've also seen other studies about health, as another benefit, college grads have significant health benefits as well. Is that how to define student success? Is it graduation? Is it wealth, career, health? How do you define student success?
If you just look at the trajectory within the student success movement, for a long time, it was access. Who's going to college? And a lot of energy was spent on it. And from there, we sort of shifted, well, who's not graduating? But it was still a very much focus on the students. Then there is a flip happening slowly to institutions taking responsibility for the success of all the students. How do you transform your institution, not who's not successful in your institution? That's a very significant shift in perspective and taking responsibility, right?
Okay, be a student-ready college, not, bemoan the lack of college-ready students.
That's right. That's right. It's a very significant mental shift that is taking place. And then institutions transforming themselves in service of students, but still the focus largely is in terms of retention and graduation rates. I think the emerging conversation is around post-graduation success. So I would say all of these dimensions matter, but I would most certainly add what happens to students once they leave their institutions. Are they thriving? How well or poorly are they doing? I believe we have as educational institutions a role to play in that space. And I would say for two reasons. One, responsibility to our students. Secondly, our learning systems might change for the way in which work is changing, right? So if you look at this sort of art on how work itself is getting transformed with the introduction of new technologies, our students today will be our learners tomorrow, because it truly is going to be a lifelong system, right? So you graduate, your work transforms itself, automation, analytics, rapid prototyping, rapid manufacturing, go through all of that sort of the emerging technologies in that space. The way in which institutions have to engage with their students is different as learners, or they're not earning credentials, but you're helping them stay competitive for whatever is coming their way in the future. And that's a very distinct and different kind of relationship that we must maintain. It goes past just your next graduate degree and so on and so forth. Because if you look at the evidence that is emerging, majority of American workers would need to be retrained. A majority of training is less than 1 year. And most of our credentials that we offer are a year in length or more. So in this emerging space, the kind of learning that needs to take place and the learning systems that must evolve are somewhat different. But again, just looking ahead and seeing what might come our way.
So step one is be accessible. Step two is take responsibility for supporting your students and enabling their success. And then step three is, transforming yourself to fulfill that responsibility and looking kind of over the horizon beyond graduation to career success, and doing it through the lens of it's not the one-time credential. It's like, preparation for lifelong competitiveness. I think that's really interesting. I mean, you've mentioned employers now and work a couple times in this conversation. Like, fundamentally, is that the role that a college or university should play? Are we the connectors between students and the workforce?
I think that certainly is one of the roles that we must take on. And, for a variety of reasons. Let's look at the student experience. Let's bring it down to that. If you look at the data, majority of students work while they're in college. And that work has an impact on their learning experience. So just thinking about how you design learning experiences where work experiences are integrated into it, I think is a very real and very pragmatic thing that educational institutions have to focus on. We were both trained as architects, and in our experience, that was a core part of the learning experience was problems coming from the employers or from the community, site-specific work, feedback, the creation of a portfolio where there's real evidence of your work. These are practices that have a place in other disciplines as well, because they allow students to transform that work experience which they're having as students as nearly like something that they're doing to pay for college to a learning experience, right? That shift from work is distinct from learning. I think it increasingly I see, and there's a number of projects that we are working on where these things are getting integrated. I see that as an important part of the kind of thinking that we need more of.
What's interesting is it's not just that today's students are tomorrow's workforce. What you're saying is today's students are also today's workforce because most students are working, and that work can be part of the learning experience. My book has 127 tips, which is probably on making the most of college and kind of finding that ROI, which is probably a few too many. I constantly get asked, if there's one tip to give students, what would it be? And I always say work on real world projects in your classes,
Yeah.
because then you can not only like find purpose and meaning in your work because you're seeing how, your classes connect to a career, to a community, and you're learning skills, but you're also meeting people. The social media strategy in your marketing class doesn't have to be for a fictitious company. It can be for a nonprofit in the community. Then you're interviewing people, you're meeting real people, you're building their portfolio. Maybe they need an intern this summer.
It's a great learning experience, right? It
Yeah.
allows you to connect two different distinct parts of your life, a skill that you better start practicing if you want to live a thriving life. But then if you look at the system itself, if you look at our systemic graduation rates, we know that a large number of students, a little bit less than half, do not graduate in 6 years from the institutions where they start. The overall number might be a little bit more, including transfer students and so on. Of not graduating might be a little bit less. But we have a significant population of Americans who have started their college education but did not finish it. But if you look at the system, what do we see? We see that a large percentage of students, somewhere between 40 to 50%, do not graduate from the college they started. Nationally, that
Mhm.
number is about 34 million returning adult students. A vast number of them want to go back to college. So here are adults who have actually significant work experience already. And this question of how do you integrate work and learning would remain, right? So they're coming back to college and they're bringing these experiences from their lives through which they have learned. And how do we help integrate?
Yeah. I mean, real world projects, learning as you're working, working as you're learning, but also just credit for your work, I think is
Yeah.
another quite tangible, practical way to bring these two worlds
Yeah.
together and to
And,
value that.
and a slight difference there in our opinion. I would say not credit for your work, but credit for your learning through work, right? So you have to still have to demonstrate that you've actually learned something. Just working by itself is not enough. There are mechanisms. You can find like portfolio reviews and, tests and other kinds of things where people can demonstrate that they have learned. That's a very uniquely SE position, I would say.
I appreciate you putting a finer point on it. So credit for your learning while working.
Wow. Yeah. Or like co-designing these experiences. You have internships,
Yeah.
you have practicums, other ways. Our teachers program here at ASU have designed this really integrated program where students are actually working in schools and these things are integrated and they're receiving credit. So there are ways of doing it and ways of doing it rather well.
And we have challenges in terms of equity, not just access, but success, and not just success in college, but beyond it. Why design? What can design do that other disciplines or approaches to student success can't?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me try to answer that. We can think together on this.
Hmm.
Number of things. Core to at least my studio experience was learning how to frame a good problem. Simply going through actions that you have engaged in the years past is not going to give you a result that is any different than what you have been accomplishing before systemically. And, we have made very little progress in some of these spaces. So I think this reframing and revisualizing and finding novel ways to segment this bigger problem. How do you improve access? And how do you improve success of students? And how do you design the services and experiences? All of those things, the kind of the core design practices can play, in my mind, a fundamental role in how we think about problems, how we design the process of getting to an answer to those
Hmm.
problems, like from the design discipline perspective. That's the second thing. This notion of co-designing, right? Designing with the people whose lives they're going to have an impact on. So be it employees or students, engaging them in problem posing, in idea generation and prioritization. In terms of social design, those are emerging practices, not that It happens in all places, but I think we have incredible capacity in that area. This process of facilitation, right? So you reframe the problem, come up with some solution, but then you have to take a community on a journey from point A to point B to transform that particular, practice, unit, organization, whatever scale the problem is at. I think design can play an incredible role in this way, making the design process, coming up with that solution, also their change management process. So you take people who are involved, whose lives are going to be affected, bring them into designing of a solution, and then the design process is laid out that you're taking them from point A, where they are, to point B. And here in particular, I would say the act of drawing, about drawing out conceptually, metaphorically from the community, but really visualize, seeing things, the practices like illustrating a design solution, things like gallery walks, things like classic brainstorming techniques, where we can see what others in a community are thinking, what is sort of the family of ideas that is out there, how one might cluster them. All of these are very visual practices that are core to design. And I think they can be deployed in very novel ways to get past disagreement, to select a wide array of alternatives, not just one solution, to democratize some of these processes. I think all of this has a particular role. Then I would go back to my training as an architect, but I think in general it's true for design as well. We're constantly looking at the idea and this notion of material imagination. How do you imagine an idea through the materials through which it will be constructed and made? That kind of practical aspect of getting things done, right? So it's not just the idea, you're broadly coming together, but you're also thinking about how you'll implement. It's said that a building is designed, multiple times. It's designed on a piece of paper, designed in the sort of the specifications of the document and a construction document. It's designed again through scaffolding, and then it is built. The same is true for these processes. And I think there's much for us to learn and put into play as we do that. And it's sort of professional project management at the end, right? Actually getting the work done.
I mean, I love all the things you mentioned about framing the problem, reframing the problem, co-designing techniques to visualize and, come up with and visualize solutions. And I love the idea that the design process is the change management process because there's really no shortage of good ideas, right? It's like coming up with those ideas in such a way that they actually happen and that a change actually occurs. The value of doing that in the right way, like with the right people, can't be underestimated, because at the end of the day, vision alone can't change the world, right? Implementation does.
And doing this intentionally. Right? So that's the piece. It's not accidental, the transformation process. It doesn't begin after you have a design solution. Then you go, oh, now we must bring the community along. It's like, no, that's not how it works if you want to be successful. A few people sitting in a small room coming with an idea and then say, oh, how do we now win, support? And it's really not how we ought to be working.
I think a couple of people in the back room, wood paneling, cigars. I think that's how you get buy-in, right? You want the fewest number of people providing input. That way the ideas are totally untested and not accepted and quite risky. I think this is a great recipe. I feel like, higher education is a wicked problem, in that it's a problem that changes as you work on it. And there's no amount of information that then you can gather that gives you a perfect solution. And so I think the mindset, the skill set, the tool set of design, helps you understand people. And where other disciplines are so focused on the analysis, I think design, maybe the strong suit is synthesis, is putting things together, making connections, and finding a way for 1 + 1 to equal 11, because, you are designing a learn work program where students are learning skills, building a network, getting a project in their portfolio, making an impact in their community. Whereas, if you were thinking about it purely analytically, those things might all just happen separately. I think there's something to that.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more thing. These problems, we made very little progress on. very difficult. Those of us who have committed their lives to working on issues of student success. And I also I've seen setbacks and challenges as we do the work. But I take from design practice this notion of like hope being a central theme of design, right? So when you're designing, you're imagining a future state you believe in, you are committed to it. I think designing as an act of faith in some way, designing as an act of hope. I think to me, sort of addition of that to this mix of student success is essential. It's very easy to give up. This work is difficult work. To change, let's say, an advising system or change the student support system or imagine it as a holistic system and not something siloed tied with power.
Yeah.
But this sort of integration of hope, thinking of the act of designing as a hopeful act, at least I carry that in my heart as I get engaged working on challenges and problems, because, then you get to contribute and imagine this world as something that is malleable, that you can change through your actions. And to me, that's sort of the classic way when I have to think about hope, when you can make things better, maybe just a little bit better for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's part of the change management point you're making, because I think, that's part of how people get excited and committed and envision and implement and follow through. And I also think, just from a practical standpoint, one of the things I've certainly learned is like most of these projects or initiatives or programs or spaces, like they need funding. I think people, while, hope isn't a strategy per se, is the soundbite. I do think people back vision, they support vision and hope and imagination a lot more readily than they support, needs. And I think, if transformation is the goal, you have to set the bar high and you have to inspire people, to get over it. And I think design can play that role.
Yeah. It can help you visualize a better future today. I think that's quite inspiring. No, conceptually, I agree with the idea that hope is not a strategy, and that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think the point I'm trying to make is when you begin to believe that the world is malleable, that the university is a malleable thing, the processes and experiences are malleable, things that can be changed and designed, then you act and you kind of propose these things. That action, that act of designing is an act of hope. And when you do that, you're absolutely right. You create a very different kind of excitement towards the work, right? People have been engaged, have been going on this journey, and you brought them along.
Yeah. You mentioned framing and reframing. And I feel like some of these things, the design mindset can do wonderful things just by reframing something. I'm remembering there's a great How I Built This episode talking with the founder of Tom's Shoes. And before he started that business, he started many others. And one thing he learned is whatever he was proposing, he would always tell someone when he had a business. He wouldn't say, I have this idea about advertising on the side of buildings. He would go to someone and say, I have this business advertising on the side of buildings. And then people would support a business, in a way that they wouldn't support an idea. So I think just like the reframe, the intention and the language and the hope can make such a huge difference. I'd love to make this concrete and talk about a few examples of projects or programs, at ASU or beyond that really have you excited for demonstrating the role that design can play in student success. I think you mentioned something about a work learning integration program. Yeah. Maybe that's one of them.
Yeah, there are a number of things that we are doing. Part of my job is to rethink and redesign University College, and three goals. One is to design personalized learning experiences to add equity gaps, to design an integrated work and learning system, and lastly, to design student services or redesign student services using design thinking, analytics, automation, and intelligent agents. We have been at it almost for 4 years now, 4.5. So that's the project. And there are a number of projects that we are working on. We're very systematically done this work, including some with you. And we have been slow, but we've been quite methodical. We have been systematically working on rethinking the academic support systems. So tutoring, supplemental instruction, all of that. And that has been fairly systematic approach where we are not only thinking about space and students' experience of space, but as a physical thing where we got a chance to work with you where you created these conceptual designs. Those things were built in the end, right? That space exists today. And a number of things are happening in that space. But so this integration of physical and digital, how would these two things come together? We are serving, about an equal number at this stage. I think the number of online students will probably increase of online and in-person students. So how would you serve them? How would this dual modality service look like? How would a university with multiple location offer services to students in multiple centers where you can walk in and, get a chance to work with students who are, studying somewhere else or online? How would you use AI in this mix? How would you redesign the job and system? So we've been working very systematically involving students, our frontline staff, and doing a series of experimentation and visualizations and micro projects over almost a 4-year period. So I'm really proud of that work that has been done in building the academic support architecture, because that's key. If you want to expand access, you need to figure out how to support students once they arrive. And their successes in some of these sort of key courses is critical. So sort of their design playing a role from imagining spaces to design of services, design a student experience, design a work experience, design of employee experience has been critical. That's one body of work. Here we are working with 12 national partners. It began as a small project in University College. And we said, what happens if you reimagine our sort of student employment as a learning experience? Well, what would it look like? What would be the learning goals? And how would we rethink these roles? And, started with the department with 100 some students, and it grew to 500 some student employees in University College. And now we have thousands of students at ASU and across our national partners. And we have received at this stage almost $2 million in grants to work to rethink student employment nationally. And we just, had a design institute on campus where people came and design thinking techniques are being used, or team travel across the country to work with others. Again, very different model of leadership here. We don't have a solution that we are saying, oh, here is the perfect solution. Everybody should use it. It's very context driven. It is driven by discovery. It is driven by the idea of making things visible, building coalitions. I'm at specific sites so they can do their transformation work and rethink student work, and starting a national movement around rethinking student work. Like all our students are working, and here there's an area of focus on student employment on campus.
And what are some of the thrusts of that redesign effort? What are you trying to get better?
Oh, well, it's like a little bit of a joke here, but I started with micro courses. We got a faculty member, problems in the world can be solved by designing a course. Yeah, it didn't work out very well. We learned that in our first trial. Yeah, that's not the way to approach this challenge. So we've gone on a pretty significant arc in terms of design through experimentation, through testing things out with small groups of students. We have learned that, this reframing of the student experience is key. So it's not only that you're having an experience within your major, but, you could be working in an AI lab, but you could also be working in the food service. And in both settings, you're learning some very unique things that are critical to your post-graduation success. How do we help you retell that story? So storytelling, change in perspective, looking explicitly at goals that employers value, and helping students evaluate where they stand vis-a-vis these goals. So building those assets, those experiences, those ways of testing oneself. And, as part of the discovery, discovered that design of supervisor experience is key to all of this. That was not part of our conceptualization initially. And we are seeing that validated as we work with at least 12 other partners.
That's really interesting.
We employ 12,000 students at ASU who are not GAs and TAs. It's a very large footprint for us.
Holy cow.
And nationally, when we think about things like work study, right? So students are working on campus. There's some federal support for this thing. If we can come up with models, which we have thought through and worked through together, then we can have an impact there, sort of suggest ideas into that space, change the policy conversation, make sure people are ready to do this kind of work on their campuses. So we have launched this thing called Work Plus Collective. Again, this idea of starting a movement where all these resources will live. They all will be open license. Anybody can use them on their campus. You just ask that they contribute their content towards this so others can do this and have this kind of multiplier effect. That's what we're tested thus far. And we just had our convening of Work Plus Collective. It's first, and we'll be doing this work for the next, 2 years. testing out other models, building the size, increasing the size of the network, giving people various levels at which they can participate. But core to all of this, coming back to your original thing, is use of design practices, right? So in discovery, framing of problems, in understanding student perspective and interviews, in coming up with solutions. Some of the work that was done, it was like classic addition and subtraction problems that we do in design studios. What happens if you have three parts and you remove one? Well, how would you redesign it? How would you add this particular distinctive thing to whatever solution you've done? Just getting people to a more creative, more hopeful place where just the institutional inertia, you can kind of get yourself past it and come up with ideas that might be, like they replace these limits on our imagination and getting ourselves away from it a little bit. Do some breakthrough moments is great. And at least for me, I learned a lot listening to people and left with at least one big idea.
You and I both have design backgrounds, but, I think our hope collectively is that even people who don't have that background can deploy the mindset, the skill set, the tool set of design and design thinking to define and solve these problems, and to advance the cause of student success. So how do you bring people along, that don't have that formal training or that background? They're like getting them to a more creative place.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that particular case, it was play. So there's this playfulness that is introduced. You start to model through this work the kind of values you want to see, the openness to ideas. It's okay to put these things out. It is okay to get into this other space. It is okay to get yourself past this boundary you place on your sort of imagination. A lot of focus on visual thinking, putting the ideas out there. There are materials available to make models and other kinds of things for people to illustrate their ideas. Whatever we need to do to make the idea visible for people to help better imagine things. And have some fun while they're doing all of that. So, I mean, it is a skill. You can help build that skill as a leader. You can help your team develop these skills. They're very easy to learn. There are all kinds of tricks of the trade that are introduced to take those of us who have a hesitation in terms of visualizing through drawing, or visualizing through drawing in a community setting. We can help improve those skills. It's like a capacity. You can easily build your team's capacity, and you are rewarded then with very novel solutions. Your change management gets just a little bit easier because people have seen this sort of image of what future looks like. I'll give you one more example. At Portland State, we worked on redesign of the advising system. And the key act there was to do communally design and illustration. Like we did a lot of background research, interviews, classic studies, surveys, all of that stuff was done. But when the community came together, they were working on multiple illustrations of an idea over a couple of months. Some parts, like what would the organizational structure look like? But there is visual illustration. What does the student journey look like? And people are agreeing and disagreeing. They're providing feedback on a visual. So you don't have to always draw. Things can be presented and feedback sought and things sort of change. So there are different ways in which you can introduce these visualization techniques and drawing techniques. But what was great about that was the community knew exactly where the design team stood. They knew how to provide them feedback in these gallery settings and other places where you can, write to them, talk to them, point out specific parts of the illustrations that were not clear, you just completely disagreed with. And it was a communal process, right? That's the other part of it. People can hear each other disagree on a visual and hear why somebody's sort of supportive of it or disagrees with it. So again, we can build these capacities in our team. We can learn quickly in some cases, thinking about the design process as sort of a part of sort of building the capacity, and then using things like illustrations and others to come to agreement on ideas where there's a lot of contention.
Yeah, I love that. I often think about 3 core tenets of design or design thinking as understanding people, thinking holistically to make connections, and then like prototyping and testing. But I feel like, part of why you prototype or test something is to make it tangible. And in a way, that's not just a mean, that's an end, right? Because like when it's tangible, then you can co-design, you can have community input, feedback. And I think you've just reminded me that there's not 3 pillars. I think there's 5, because I think that the make it tangible and co-design are key elements of that capacity. I love what you said about it's a skill kind of like any other, right? Like a leader's job was to build the capacity of your team. And in the same way that you have people focused on generative AI and analytics and storytelling, you also want to equip people with these tools and these skills as well. Great conversation. I really appreciate your input, and I'm looking forward to how the book shapes up, and really appreciate your insight and hope this helps people design student success.
I certainly hope so. It's been fun to work with you, Elliot.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.